Welcome to People Behind the Power, part of the Metric Podcast Network. Data centers are the backbone of the digital world, but behind every facility, every build, and every operational decision, there are people making it happen. Every episode, we sit down with the leaders driving the data center industry forward, the careers they've built, the teams they've scaled, and what it actually takes to deliver at the pace this sector demands. A Metric DCX production. This is People Behind the Power. We're here for day 2 of Data Cloud in Cannes with Brian Moon, CEO of PTC. Brian, thanks for joining the podcast.
No, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Brian, if you could just give a quick introduction to yourself.
Sure. Brian Moon, CEO of Pacific Telecommunications Council, also known by PTC in its shorter format. And we are based in Honolulu, Hawaii, where the organization's actually been headquartered and was founded 48 years ago, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you get started in this industry?
Oh, good question to start with. So when we say industry, with my career specifically, I like to back up and say it's more about the technology. So prior to PTC, I was with an organization called the Consumer Technology Association. I was there for about 15 years, and CTA is primarily known for their big convention, which is called CES, the one in Las Vegas, which is a big tech trade show. And so that's where I say my career started, because I think it's all technology. And even our industry now is still, I think, technology. It just happens to be a niche of that. And so, I was with CTA CES for about 15 years and then joined PTC about 4 years ago. And so made the move from mainland United States all the way to Honolulu, Hawaii.
How's that going for you in terms of living in Hawaii?
It's going well. It's going well. It's probably on the bottom of the list to many people, right? No, it's pleasant, and it's a great environment for lots of reasons, for sure. But it's actually worked out really well, and I can see why. The original founders wanted to have a place to have a meeting like that in Hawaii, because it is a very strategic location outside of all of the positives of weather and things like that. But from a strategic standpoint, certainly makes a lot of sense for our industry.
100%. We were speaking off camera that you don't own a winter jacket. So when you came to London, you weren't quite prepared. So
I was not. I didn't think I would be traveling to cold places anymore after we made the move. But certainly my I've been fortunate enough to still travel a lot. And obviously we're here in Cannes, and it's beautiful here. It reminds me a little bit of Hawaii from a weather standpoint. But yes, lovely places like London make me regret not having to pack one winter jacket.
So when did you realize that leadership was the path for you?
Oh, wow. So I don't know. It's always one of those things where you sort of fall into it, right? I don't know if anyone, I'm sure there are folks who aspire to be leaders one day. I think it was just, for me, a natural progression over the years of different roles I've been fortunate enough to be in. And primarily my background, I would say probably the more important parts of my career have been in leadership roles. I was at CTA CES, I was leading business development for both the Las Vegas event, and then we started a show in Shanghai, China, which was another big adventure. And then, I think it just naturally are those skills that you start to learn and pick up and start to enjoy, start the interactions with people, start to develop people, train people, next generation leaders. And I think it's just a role that's developed naturally over the years, and I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Well, you speak there about the skills that you've developed.
Yep.
What about the traits that you sort of naturally possess, or that you feel like make you a successful leader? It probably might be a difficult question to ask you to reflect upon your own traits like that. But
no, one really practical thing that immediately comes to mind is, and I say this in all of my the interview processes with new folks I'm trying to bring on board to the team, is I'm literally an open door, and I mean that literally, and I also mean that digitally as well, if you say, and I mention that to everyone, is and it might be to the detriment of my family, but I'm always connected, whether that's good or bad. And I think as a leader, that's important to point out early on when you're working with a team or an individual or on a certain project initiative, is, if I'm part of the decision-making process or someone needs my opinion on something, I never want to be the stopgap to anything progressing forward. And so, again, good or bad, I'm usually very quick to respond to things because I want to make sure I'm not stopping anything from moving forward. But, I think that's one immediately that comes to mind. But I also have had really fortunate to have really good folks I look up to, whether they were direct managers or CEOs of organizations or just C-suite executives that I've admired from afar, just based on interactions. And learning from them, whether it's a literal training session or it's just observing from a background or watching them on a podcast or a video interview or on stage, and not emulating them, but taking those specific traits that you see and say, oh, I want to learn on that, or I think I'm doing that already, and just kind of adding that to the portfolio.
That's a great answer. I think it's good to reflect on those qualities that have got you where you are today. Yeah. So for those that might not be completely aware, could you give us a bit of information about PTC as a business and I guess as the conference as well?
Absolutely. So PTC, as we discussed, founded about 48 years ago. So this coming January will be a 49th conference or meeting, but also the organization's birthday in a sense. But the organization, it's technically a not-for-profit membership organization. Mm-hmm. It was founded and it continues to be headquartered in Honolulu, with a focus on the Pacific Rim originally, and it still is. But one of the founders, Richard Barber, back in the day, basically, obviously way ahead of his time, said, there was a time when mainland United States was starting to talk about connecting to Asia, right, through subsea cables and telecommunications processes. And he was starting to notice that Hawaii was being bypassed, which is still sort of the case. But that Hawaii was being bypassed as a connection point. And he's asking why. We're in a strategic location in the Pacific Ocean. Why wouldn't you connect or hop through Hawaii? And so 40 plus years ago, Richard Barber, along with government officials, business leaders, academics was his background, started a meeting, or the first PTC meeting or conference, and had a discussion about that. And now it's grown, almost 49 years later, to this meeting, this convening of all of those parties, right? We have government officials, we have academics, we have senior level executives, industry, all coming together to literally discuss what's going to happen in the following year and in the future of our industry. But in addition to the annual conference, which is what PTC is primarily known for, we actually have activities all throughout the year. We started a mid-year seminar in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago, and that focuses specifically on policy and government officials. And the idea for that seminar was that was at a point where the administration was changing, so there were going to be a lot of new faces in roles. And so our members were asking for a platform to bring them in front of the government officials. And it was actually reciprocal, because the government official wanted to know what was going on in the industry before they started making big decisions. And so we have the PTC DC mid-year seminar. And then also throughout the year, because we're a council and we're a not-for-profit, we're in a very fortunate situation where we give back. We don't have to answer to shareholders, and everything that's revenue driven, or we bring in revenue, we reinvest it back into the industry, which is extremely important. And again, a good position for us to be in, because we can focus investments on education. So we have a PTC and Beyond program, which is focused on educating young professionals. We're also on the third year of our Top Talent Leadership Development program. That's in partnership with Columbia Business School, and that is educating the next generation of C-suite executives. So think of it as a mini MBA program. We also can partake in things like research studies. We just finished a research study specifically on satellite technology and how that's impacting the Pacific Islands, specifically Tonga, for this research study. So there's lots of things we do throughout the year. Many people don't realize that, and that's okay, because the annual conference is the one event that brings it all together. But the team is pretty busy.
I think it's such an interesting point that you make there. And I wanted to dive into something a bit deeper than just the conference itself. What you're doing is something that needs to be done in the industry, right?
Yeah.
There is a finite amount of people that have the experience required for the demand. Yeah. And I think it's important that as an industry that we are looking to develop the younger generation,
Absolutely.
But also making sure that the right information's out there as well.
Yeah.
We recently had a conversation with a partner of ours about how the US doesn't have a quantity surveying degree. So one of my colleagues does a lot of work relocating people from the UK to the US because they have the quantity surveying degrees. And so we were speaking with this partner of ours, and he said, it's crazy that hasn't happened yet. Let me try and partner with one of the universities that he sort of, that he went to, and try and set up this US quantity surveying degree so that we can produce our own, cost managers and quantity surveyors in America. But again, it takes someone to actually have that thought to go and do that. Yeah,
it takes someone to have that thought is a really good point. It also is important that there is follow-up and support from, let's just say, a company or an organization, right? There's one thing for someone or a company to say, yes, we support that and things, but there's something else to actually invest in personnel to be able to do those programs. So no, you're absolutely right, and that's where things like our partnership with Columbia Business School and the Young Professionals program are extremely important to us, because, as you've probably heard as well, there's a gap. Yeah, and there's a gap already, but there's going to be one coming up significantly in the next 5+ years of, who's going to be that next level manager, who's going to be the next level C-suite executive at these organizations, and the pipeline's pretty thin in terms of talent that way. And so again, as a council, we're fortunate enough to be able to participate in that. And it doesn't mean that we need to pat ourselves on the back. This is just good for the industry, right? That we need to have the next generation of leaders coming up.
Absolutely. When you reflect on your career and your time as a leader in your career as well, what do you think that some of the pivotal moments are?
Oh, let's see. I would say joining PTC first and foremost, because it's the most recent one. So I joined the organization about 4 years ago, and if you were to ask me 4 years ago, do you see yourself in the CEO role? I probably would have hesitated, right? Because I was at that point many years or several years in senior management, but to lead an organization, that's a whole nother challenge and opportunity. So I think that would be the biggest pivot, and I sincerely mean this, where I do thank the leadership at that time, and even now with the board of governors at PTC, for taking that leap of faith. And I think that's extremely important in any leadership role or any manager role, where if you see an opportunity to give a chance to someone, sometimes it's always great because you have networks and you can trust on referrals and things like that. But if there's an opportunity that you see someone that you know or believe in that can raise up your organization's profile or the work that you're doing, to sort of take that leap of faith. And I remember that. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity I've given, and I try to do the same on different levels with my organization, or if I'm a referral for someone, and try to give an honest review that this person, I think, will have a good chance to step up.
I think it's a great point and a great thing to reflect on as well. And one of the questions that I was going to ask you later on in the conversation is, how do you reflect on this idea of promoting people internally and developing them versus hiring externally where there's a gap?
Yeah. I mean, certainly for different roles, there are going to be responsibilities where someone might just have the right experience to do so, right? And there's a good culture fit there, and it makes sense if it's an external candidate, right? And that's fine. But I think always looking internally, that is good for many reasons. One being, it helps with culture within an organization, that others, peers, see that, oh, there is an opportunity for me to move up. It may not necessarily be a role that they directly would have been promoted to or advanced to, but even if it's taking that little bit of leap of faith and saying, I believe in this person enough, or I can train them up enough that they can pivot to be able to do these other things. And so there's not a perfect answer. There's going to be some positions where an external candidate may make the most sense, but if there's even a little slight opening, right, that an internal candidate might be able to fill that role, then I think it's worth having that conversation with them. Even if he or she doesn't believe it, always observing from a 30 or 20,000 foot view that, oh, I think I can train this person up, or I think that person would be great.
Well, one of the positive things about that as well is that you have a track record to know that they are aligned with your culture.
Right.
And so my next question was going to be, when you are trying to build high-performing teams, what do you look for that you can't necessarily see immediately on a resume?
So this is a great question about culture. And so I am very much in favor now. I know, obviously, with video technology, you can have interviews and conversations over video and things like that. But if it's possible, I'm still very much in favor of meeting a person. There's a lot to be said when you meet a person face-to-face versus on video, right? Obviously, you can have the conversation on video, but there's certain things like body language, nonverbal communications that you won't be able to see on video. Mm-hmm. And so, I think to that point is it's extremely important in terms of culture, but also there's, again, technical skills that people will list on CVs. And by the CV that they'll probably be able to do the responsibilities you're asking them to do or the position's going to require. There's obviously networks and referrals with tools like LinkedIn, et cetera. It's pretty easy to find out who someone has worked with and whether they would give them that thumbs up of approval. But again, it goes back to me personally, is meeting the person, getting to know them in the short amount of time that we have, because it can say a lot about a person if you're going to get along with them, if the culture is going to be right.
Absolutely. We just had Chris Downey on the podcast, and he spoke about the whole point of an interview process from his perspective is to really try and screen for those traits and characteristics that matter to him and his organization. Fundamentally, his belief is, we shouldn't even be in the room interviewing if they don't have the technical expertise to be there. So we're not really assessing them on that technical expertise. We are assessing them on whether they are aligned to our culture.
Yeah, I love, there was actually, speaking of which, there was an article that I read recently about Steve Jobs when he was part of an interview process. His question in his mind was, would I go have a beer with this person?
Yeah.
That was one of his measuring sticks, right? And I think that's culturally, right? Would I go have a beer with this person after work? And again, you're absolutely right. I mean, again, on CVs, you can see what experiences is, and we probably wouldn't be talking to the person if they didn't, check off all those boxes. But there's another level of interaction and engagement that you can't get on a piece of paper.
Absolutely. So what would you say that your biggest hiring mistake would be, and what have you potentially learned from that?
Hiring mistake, it's not a perfect science. And even though I've met candidates or previous employees face to face, I mean, everyone gets it wrong, right? You think there's going to be a fit, but not. I think for me, it's those types of learning. Every opportunity is an opportunity to get better at it, and it's just learning from that. I can't point to a specific event or an incident about an employee, but I think generally I have a good sense of people's characteristics and personalities. But again, it's not a perfect science, and I think it's just fine tuning as you go, and every role is going to be different.
So when you evaluate the current talent landscape, what do you think's changed in the last 3 to 5 years, and what roles do you feel like are the hardest to fill or the most in demand?
So starting with the overall industry and what we hear from our members and colleagues from the industry side is, and what we talked about a few minutes ago is, I think there's going to be that gap. I think in senior leadership, there's going to be that gap of who are the next, again, mid-level managers who are going to be able to step into the C-suite. And then I would say on the opposite end of the spectrum, who are the new people? I think that is actually a concern for our industry, and should be, because as we both know, our industry is growing fast and furiously, and there aren't enough, I think, people in the entry level or a couple of years level that can step into those roles. And so it's sort of both ends of the spectrum that we're going to need to fill pretty quickly. Personally, for me, what are the most difficult positions to fill? Believe it or not, I think it's been on the finance and accounting world, because and usually it's folks who know data and numbers and can do that all day long. But it goes back to our earlier point of there has to still be a culture behind that, even if it is someone who will never be face to face with a member or have a conversation or be able to travel to a conference and meet sponsors and members and things. There's still a cultural aspect of that, and I think again that's extremely important. So, fortunate enough, we're good now, personally. But yeah, that was probably, I would say, if there was a challenging role to fill, it's not, again, only filling someone who's going to be able to do the job, but it's someone who's going to be able to fit in with the organization and the culture.
Culture is so important, right?
Yep.
And we've also spoken, and it's self-evident that the technical expertise has to be there as well.
Yep.
One of the things that I gleaned from our conversation with Tony Rasabi, who you're obviously good friends with and colleagues with, I guess, was this idea of being relentless. Don't stop, keep going. You have to have that desire to continue driving the business forward. What other traits do you feel like leaders in this space need in 2026?
So Tony, yeah, you're absolutely right. So Tony's a great friend. I consider him a mentor as well. And just quick side stories. I was able to spend a few weeks ago, Tony in New York, so in his home base. And if you've ever seen someone, you ever hear of the term just New York hustle or someone who hustles, Tony is nonstop. And we may say we're energetic, or people may say, do you ever sleep, etc. Tony does not sleep. He's great. In addition to not stopping and continuing the pursuit, I think another good trait of a leader is trust but verify. That's stuck with me for a long time, and I learned that early on, or I was told that early on, is you have to give some slack to someone, and I think that's really important, especially for new employees or new staff members you're bringing on. And it goes to the micromanaging someone, right? Because if someone's micromanaging you, they're just under a microscope. They're just going to be feeling pressure, not being able to be creative and not be able to put their own process and methods in place. And so the trust but verify has been something really important that stuck with me, especially new employees. Yes, you'll train them. Yes, you'll guide them on certain procedures that we're used to doing, but you have to give them a little bit of grace and being able to make mistakes, not major mistakes, but some mistakes along the way, because that's the only way they're going to learn. And that's the only way, and that's how I learn. You make mistakes in life, right? And so that's extremely important. And I would always say another important thing is always listen more than talk. I think that's a trait that I've seen great leaders and folks that I've interacted with, is that, yes, we all know that everyone's brilliant, everyone has a lot of knowledge in them, but to listen. It doesn't matter who you're speaking with, whether it's C-level or a person who's new to your organization. Everyone has brilliant ideas, and it's important as a leader to listen to those, because there's going to be a gem in there at some point.
You're completely right. When you are trying to produce the next generation of leaders, you have to give them the space and autonomy to make mistakes, and that's how they're going to develop.
Right.
What's interesting, you mentioned there about Tony being this New York hustler type of person. When we spoke with Tony, there's a question that we generally ask our guests, which is, what would the person who is going to succeed you in your role, what traits would they need to have? And he potentially seemed personally offended at the idea of him ever sort of, leaving the industry or retiring. Retiring is not a word that's in his vocabulary. So I think that he really articulated that need to be relentless, and especially in this industry, the way that it's growing. I thought it was a great point.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I think there's different levels of perseverance, and I think some are more literally display it. I think others will quietly do it in their background. And again, I know we've talked about Steve Jobs and Apple, but I think their current CEO, Tim Cook, is like that. I mean, he's a quieter leader, but I'm sure he's relentless in the background, right, to continue that. And I agree with Tony. I mean, it's the pursuit of, I don't know if it's the pursuit of perfection, but it's the pursuit of always wanting to do better, right, and always wanting to make the organization better. And I would say that the same thing with PTC is I was fortunate enough to come into this role with an established organization, right? I mean, it's been going on for 40 plus years. My predecessor laid a great foundation of culture, but also what's also unique about PTC is being based in Hawaii is, for those who may not be aware, I mean, Hawaii, although part of the United States, it has its own culture, right? And so that was extremely important for me to learn from being on the ground perspective, is that you have to respect the culture and doing business locally with the community first, and not just holding an international event once a year. So I agree with Tony in the pursuit of being relentless and always hustling.
Just to dive a bit deeper into what you just said, working with the community before you host this massive global event is very relevant to the idea of building data centers. Yeah. And we're in this era right now where there's a lot of anti-data center sentiment. Could you sort of expand a little bit on potentially what you've learned, or some of your thoughts on the idea of engaging the community, making sure that you're doing right by them before you actually go and build something or host something?
Yeah, it's a great segue to what's going on in our industry right now. You're absolutely right. There's certainly brewing, or it's already reached the top of a lot of challenging or negative, coverage of what's going on, and specifically the data center industry in the United States. Starting with Hawaii, it's an island, And there's a culture there that has existed long before PTC or before it officially became part of the United States. But I think working with the community first and foremost there is, it's almost also PTC's mission is how are we giving back? And that's extremely important to me when I'm in Hawaii and working with the communities. These are the things we're doing for the community. You can talk about tax revenue, you can talk about tourism revenue and things like that. But what's extremely important to the locals and the community is that PTC is actually a made in Hawaii story, which they love, and it should be promoted that way. Now, switching gears to the industry as a whole, especially in the United States, it's an opportunity for our industry right now from everything that we're reading and hearing about on the negative side of what's going on with data centers it's a big opportunity for our industry to get ahead of projects that they're starting and getting to meet with communities and industry community leaders and to talk about what the benefits are. And I think that's where, if we have missed a boat, we probably did with that. And I was actually, I was sitting in on a session yesterday, and I know you've had another guest, Buddy Reiser, before, who's also a friend of PTC. And I think, the session and Buddy and we would all agree is this is now the time to do that. And we probably should have been doing this before projects get off the ground. But there was one speaker yesterday who said, if you tried to start a project with what the plan was 5 years ago, your project's going to get rejected now. Right, because you can't just go in and start building something and then ask for forgiveness later, because it's that model is not working anymore. And so again, I do think of it as an opportunity because it is a time to educate the community as a whole on what all of the positives are of a data center or another specific technology that's going to be built in your community, because there is. It is going to be advantageous for the community and the entire country at some point. But again, I think it's time, and this is probably the wake-up call to be able to start that education and that that information sharing.
Agreed. From a recruitment perspective,
Mm-hmm.
Our best partners are the ones that will work with us as consultants, right?
Yep.
Actually listen to our opinions. We're
Yep.
really embedded in the industry, and we're really trying to sort of educate, and we can't overemphasize enough the value of these hires, these head of community engagement hires, because it's not just something that's there to do well, but it also has huge commercial and economic implications on whether a project's actually going to get approved or not. So it's a really good point that you make.
Yeah, it has to be reciprocal.
Yeah.
And to your comparison, you're absolutely right. I mean, any organization or partnership that you're having with somebody else it has to work both ways. You both have to benefit from it. And again, as an industry, we know the advantages of having a data center build and the technology coming in, but if you're not sharing that with those who are going to be impacted day to day, then they're going to feel lost naturally, right? I mean, if you don't have all the information, then you start making your own assessments and getting maybe incorrect information from online and social media and things like that. And, we all know it's not all true online. And so, but I think that's a little bit dangerous, right? If you leave it in their hands when we as an industry have all of that, we just need to share it better.
Great. So we've spoken earlier about what the next generation of leaders need in terms of their traits and characteristics. So this might be something you've already covered, but if you were to leave the industry tomorrow, what traits and characteristics would your successor need to be successful in your role?
Okay. So I'll copy Tony and start off by being offended that I will not leave the industry tomorrow, just to give some reassurance to everybody I work with. I would say, certainly a technology background is helpful, right? To have the technical expertise or some industry knowledge is going to be helpful to be able to come in. I also think our industry is changing rapidly. And specifically for my role, if I were hypothetically leave tomorrow, I think the next person needs to come in and be flexible. I think that's helped tremendously over the past 4 years for me, but also to continue to listen to our members and the industry, because again, it's a reminder that PTC only exists because we are a member-driven organization. We are also representatives of the industry, and by the industry, I mean everything, not only data centers, but academics, satellite, fiber, et cetera, right? Everyone across the industry are members of PTC. And so flexible, open-mindedness, listening to our constituents on what they feel like is going to be needed, not only for PTC, but for the annual conference, or if there are different programs and activities that we should be investing in. Again, I mean, things like the research study that I mentioned at the beginning, that was an idea brought to us by actually the government of Tonga, because they knew we were a neutral body source that they could trust, but that then we would find a third-party research group that would do the study for us. And so, I think flexibility, listening to members, being open to new programs and initiatives. But again, going back to the key point we keep coming back on as culture is, being able to speak with everybody, regardless of levels, regardless of company size, is they're all invested in a certain way. And, I feel like they have that now, is they feel like we are that trusted source and they can come to PTC or me anywhere. And I love that about my role now, is even coming to an event like this, and we talked off camera before this was my first time in Cannes, that I'll just be walking down the street or walking through the Congress Center, and just because someone recognizes me, they'll come up with an idea or just to say hello. And I love that. I love the engagement of that, because, again, there's a gem somewhere in there, and there's always something to learn with the interactions.
Well, I can tell just from speaking with you off camera and during this podcast that you are incredibly passionate about your mission, right? Yeah. What is it that motivates you every day? What is it that gets you to get out of bed every morning?
So getting up every morning is not difficult with having young children, right? So that's that's an easy one. But always being connected, and I always have to be connected because our constituents are international. So there's always someone awake who's willing to talk. But what drives what's the driver every single day is I do, and I do mean this throughout our conversation, is I sincerely believe we are in the best industry right now, and you can call that technology, you can call it data centers, you can call it digital infrastructure, whatever you want. But it is the most exciting time to be in our space right now. And I feed off the passion and the energy of folks I interact with frequently. Those are the Tony Wasabis of the world. Those are the Bill Barneys of the world. Those are my, the board of governors of the world and other leadership, because they are on the front lines every single day, right? They are driving what's going to happen in our industry next year, 5 years, 10 years from now. And to see their passion is what I feed off of. And to see things like our programs, to see the annual conference, to see PTC DC, to see our research study, really be well received. It's a good check mark and balance that we're doing something right. And that's what drives me every single day. And if we're doing something right, that means we're helping somebody out there. Obviously, hopefully it's for the entire industry, but there are many times I'll have conversations with small startup companies, and they'll say, I went to the annual conference, I can't believe I met this person, or I closed this deal because of you and it's not me, but it was the annual conference, but it's what the team delivered. Those are the moments that drives me every single day.
Brian, so we were just speaking off camera about the innovation in the data center space, and specifically, a company called StarCloud at the moment who are building data centers in space,
right?
Which is, unbelievable in terms of the ingenuity that goes behind that. What would you say that some of the best and most interesting innovations that you've seen in the space over the last 3 to 5 years?
I'm excited about that example, though. I think that's one that we'll continue to look at. Obviously, our industry is looking at different alternative ways to build and move data centers and processes different ways. So I think that'll be one that is definitely one to keep an eye on. This may not be new anymore, but remember, liquid cooling isn't that old, but that I think everyone is pushing towards, right? Finding alternative ways to cool data centers, and that type of technology is going to continue to advance. I've also recently met over the past couple of years with more companies, and you talk about power now, again with data centers, but offshore power. So there was a company I spoke with, a member of ours, who are now building remote power sources on ships. And so these ships can go into any bay that can support it, and then they'll run the power off of the ship. Wow. And so that's interesting, right, when you talk about power constraints in our industry as well. And then AI is an easy one, right, because, personal use, we use AI for certain reasons, but specifically for the industry, I think it's going to continue to advance because it's going to continue to make power grid smarter. It's going to make staffing easier for companies, but AI will continue to evolve in our industry as well. So it goes back to what we said a minute ago. It's an exciting time because all these new technologies are relevant to us in one way or another.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So who in the industry should we be talking to next?
Oh, wow. So you've already spoken with Tony Wasabi. You've already spoken with Buddy Reiser, who we mentioned. You've had a good number of guests. Let's see. You could probably talk to, Bill Barney is a great example. He's also, he was the immediate past chair of PTC, still vice chair on the board of governors. Sean Bergen is another great, leader in the subsea space with AP Telecom. I also bring up a couple of folks that I really enjoy working with. Also is Isabel Parody and NASBAC's, also board of governors. And I may just be listing off all of my, technically all of my bosses, right, on the board. But any one of them are great folks that you can reach out to. And they're all industry leaders in their own right. And I've always obviously been in the industry a long, long time, and all bring different, really bright perspectives.
Absolutely. I mean, this podcast is about leadership and about the industry.
Yep.
So we want people that have been influential leaders, but we also want people that have been innovators and people that are doing something different in the industry. So I think it's a great point that you mentioned.
Yeah. Also, when you ask that type of question, typically you look at folks who've been in the industry a long time. But speaking of what we've been talking about young and next generation, there's a lot of young folks. I say young because they're younger than me, but there are a lot of great next generation talent that are coming up in the pipeline. And we've been fortunate enough as an organization to have many of them come through programs like Beyond, or come to the annual conference and participate in different sessions, or in different programs that we do there. But although we say there's a talent gap, which there is, it's also the future is bright because we're addressing it now. And, I think our industry realizes that we'll tighten that gap.
It's a really interesting point that you mentioned. We just had Jacob Grimm on the podcast, who is the director of pre-construction for Mission Critical with Shawmut Design and Construction. And his answer to that question was young people in the industry.
Yeah.
It wasn't a specific person that's been in the industry for 30 years. He said, I'm interested in hearing something that you don't generally hear on podcasts, which is hearing the newer voice.
Yeah.
So to finish the podcast, we have a rapid fire close around 3 questions, and we'll just get right into it. So First question, what's the best career advice that you've ever received?
Trust but verify.
Great. What's one trait that every leader in the sector needs in 2026?
Be open-minded. There's going to be a lot of changes continuing to happen. I think being flexible, not following the same model that an organization has followed, but being able to be flexible with changes that are going to happen, because changes will happen. And I think we've witnessed that even over the past 1-2 years.
Exactly. The way that the industry's grown in the last, let's say, 3 years, there's no model that is sort of up to date for that level of growth.
Absolutely.
Final question, what is one book, podcast, or person that has potentially changed your thinking recently?
Oh, not so recently. If I can recommend 2 books. So the first one is Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, the CEO of Walt Disney Corporation. And the second book is Shoe Dog, Phil Knight from Nike. Both great reads, easy reads. But what I really took away from both and what they share is that this may be another piece of advice is I personally believe there's no such thing literally as luck, right? And there's the old cliche of luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And for me, those 2 reads were extremely literal to me because they were great examples of 2 individuals that were told early on in their careers things aren't possible. But they did it. They overcame it. And this, I think, goes back to even what Tony mentions as well, is that sort of connection is always continue to persevere and be relentless. If you have a passion for something and you have a vision to get it done, and which is what, Bob and Phil did in the, mentioned those books, and Tony has said it as well, is if you have that passion, no one's going to stop you. It's not. But it's not going to be easy. There's lots of hurdles along the way. And obviously for many of us, including myself, it took, I think, many years to be at a position where I have an opportunity to speak with you and others and now give advice, because we're supposed to be experts, but we're not. We're always learning. But I think having those guidelines in place and learning along the way, and always learning, that's another piece of advice, is always be learning, because we all don't know everything. Our industry is changing. from a management perspective, you have new generations coming online. You have to learn about their traits, but always be learning and be flexible in that standpoint.
It's so interesting to hear you speak about that. One of the things that I've gathered from having these conversations with people like yourself, Chris Downey, Tony Rasabi, is this humility that you all have in terms of continually learning from the people around you and the great people around you. And I think that that's something that really characterizes the great leaders in this industry. My final question would be, is there a message that you'd like to share with our viewers, whether it's about PTC or about the industry generally?
I'd love for everyone to join us in Honolulu every January. Next event is January 17th through 20th. But from an industry standpoint, so first starting off with what we've been talking about with just leadership training, et cetera, is, it's that drive to persevere is going to make you successful. Actually, another piece of advice I'll throw out there is at some point in a career, I think even if you're just starting off in the career, and I actually will mention this as I have young children, is at some point, have a job, whether it's a part-time job or a full-time job, but have some experience where you have to interact with people. I will be, I'll share that, in my young career, I had part-time jobs when I was going through high school and university where it was concession stands or it was customer service or something. But at some point in a leader's career, they're going to have to sell something, whether it's themselves, a product, a technology, an idea. You're going to have to sell it. And I think having that interaction and those interpersonal skills are extremely valuable. I think that's one takeaway. From an industry perspective, again, it goes back to what we said, is the industry's changing rapidly. And I think those who just stick with what the blueprint was several years ago are going to be a little bit more challenged than others who are now more flexible and see opportunities to work with different partners and vendors. And that was actually a key theme of, I would say, the annual conference. Sort of this kind of overlying theme that hung around is it's the word convergence, is everyone needs to work together now. A data center company cannot just work by themselves. They now have to work with power companies, water companies, right, the utility companies, but now they have to work with private equity companies, because who's going to help fund them and support them? And so it's the theme of convergence, and I think that's been where the companies who have been successful in recent years have really flourished, because they saw that opportunity and they have to, right? Everyone's a big piece of this.
Absolutely. You say convergence, and again, it's something that I've really, when I've been listening to the people that have joined the podcast, that is such a key thing. But it's not even just in terms of the trade partners that will be working together to deliver a project or to build a business, but it's also in terms of your competitors. It's a huge industry in terms of the growth and the capital behind it, but it's also weirdly, uniquely quite a small industry. And again, Chris Downey yesterday was saying, his quote unquote competitors are people that he views as friends, and fundamentally they are working against each other but together in terms of driving the industry forward.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to add to that, is you don't hear the word competition or competitor anymore.
Yeah.
Or not as frequently, because everyone is working together.
Yeah.
The industry is big enough that everyone can have their piece of the cake or piece of the pie. But everyone is working together in their own way, right? And right, it was just going to add to that. You don't hear the word competition anymore.
Perfect. Well, that's everything. Really appreciate you joining the podcast. We will be joining you at PTC next year.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on, Brian. It's been a real pleasure.
No, thank you again for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.